Thank you, Commissioner Ball. Thank you, Dr. Glenn. That was a really great presentation and conversation. And sorry we lost you there for a little while.
Yeah, I apologize. Thank you all. Have a great day.
All right.
Thank you.
Great job, Andy. Thank you so much. So the final discussion we're going to have today is looking forward. And what can we all do? What can we identify as action steps that we want the collection of states and others all working together to take in the months ahead? This conference, this gathering, was intended to kick off discussions and build on discussions that have been going on for some time about collective action, regional action that we can take to collectively advance the goals that we've all been discussing here. So, you know, I've just identified a few areas, several areas that have been mentioned. Forests identified as the most important resource for us to take. How can we work together to protect the forests of the Northeast? Urban forests and the equity concept. How can we work together as states to adopt the tree equity program? Soil, what are the actions that we could take to establish a consistent regional methodology for soil testing? And can we work together to revive the National Soil Monitoring Network of the NRCS? What can we learn from Vermont's program about payment for ecosystem services, or the federal EQIP program? What can we do to address and overcome the historic injustices dating back to the times of slavery, the loss of land ownership, to provide access to land, to capital and other resources for our Black, Indigenous, and people of color? What can we do to strengthen and create action relating to the carbon compliance and voluntary markets that we heard about today? And what are the actions that we just heard about from Commissioner Ball and Dr. Glenn regarding state and federal partnerships and the Global Climate Solution Act, soil and water conservation districts? So all of these are areas that I think we can take action on, and Senator Pacheco is going to facilitate the discussion of this with our panelists.
Well, thank you very much, Ned. And you have hit all the high points about the conference, you know, thus far, in terms of, you know, whether we talk about carbon sequestration and the market-based compliance mechanisms, the voluntary mechanisms that are out there that help drive some of the natural and working land revenues to help move us forward in this regard. When we look at something else that I think that we might want to have more discussion on, and it was mentioned briefly by a few of the panelists, is our higher education institutions, the land grant institutions, and the extension services that are out there in our general region, and having them plugged in more directly to some of this dialogue with legislators as we move forward, because I think that sometimes there's a gap between what's happening in the executive branch of our governments and what the legislature is aware of in terms of what's happening in the executive branch side. One of the things I had mentioned to Rona earlier, it was about a basic farm database. where are the, what is classified as a quote unquote farm by USDA, and where are the farms? How much acreage do we have? When we get into looking at, a district I represent, for example, where the cranberry industry is significant. So, and with the major producers, we have that acreage defined. But some of the very small vegetable farms or other categories where somebody just sells maybe $1,000 worth of product, they are classified as a farm. And so it's very interesting for us to really get into that a little bit more and really have a basic database that we can all understand in terms of what are the natural and working lands. Where are they? Where specifically are they on mapping? So we can identify them and be able to track what is actually happening. And finally, I think the opportunities in urban forestry are huge. It's a lot of it's all around the financing of how do we get that connection, moving forward. So let me open it up for reactions from everybody. And, we have, Didi Barrett on with us and Carolyn Partridge and Sacha. Please give us your reaction as to what you think. And we have a little bit of time here. But I think if we can focus on what is the one or two things that we have the greatest potential to be able to achieve, not only as a region, but the legislatures, in the country could be looking at relative to the natural and working lands. Carolyn, I'll go to you. You have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Marc. I've really enjoyed this webinar these last 2 days. It's been fascinating for me. And I think one of the things we should look at, and I don't know if this can be done regionally or if it has to be done state by state, but I think we can probably learn from other states, is how we can incentivize keeping lands as part of the working landscape. Because I think one of the things that I've been aware of, but I was just reconfirmed the last couple of days, is the opportunities we have for carbon sequestration and in fact net reductions of carbon in terms of agricultural practices and our forestry, our forests. And I'm spoiled. Right now, I'm looking out over Turkey Mountain. I cannot see another house. There are hundreds, if not thousands of acres that I'm looking at, as well as my barn down across the road. But in Vermont, 73% of the land is forested. So we're sort of spoiled here. But 80% of that land, that forested land, is in private ownership. And so the challenge is there to keep it forested. We just had a report from Commissioner of Forest, Parks, and Recreation, Michael Snyder, that we are losing 11,000 acres of forest land per year, which is not really a lot when you're thinking about the major total. But the other concern is forest fragmentation. And so in Vermont, we have a very, very good current use program that values land at its use value. And for instance, we just got our report, and this coming year, our ag land is going to be valued at $405 dollars per acre, and productive non-productive forest land at $152 per acre. And the tension here is between what this land can produce versus what it could produce if it was sold for development. So, this is part, I think, of the tension. As I said, the current use system in Vermont is pretty good. Although the pandemic has caused a lot of people to want to move to Vermont. So property values are increasing in certain areas. Young people, because of agriculture, young people are moving to Vermont, which is a good thing. And then the other thing I think we can also offer is some access to capital. I heard that repeated a number of times, and allowing BIPOC communities to access capital. And just this last week, our Working Lands Enterprise Board came before us, and we had 15 people testifying about all of the cool things that can happen in terms of access to capital. So I'm happy to share some of this stuff with folks in future webinars. I also would love to think, we did have a workshop on this about a regional food system, which I think is something we could all work collaboratively on as well. So those are my thoughts, Mark. Sorry if I went on too long. But,
no, that was fantastic, actually, because when we think about private sector ownership of forests and the natural and working lands, I mean, let's face it, that's a huge issue. It's great if everybody decides to keep their lands exactly the way they are, but if overnight, the development rights go in a different direction, unless we buy out the development rights, unless we figure out a way to do that, then, to keep those lands in the same, running in the same way that they are now, we can't guarantee that the carbon numbers we're talking about going to 2030 and 2050 are going to stay there.
Right.
Right now, so that's a big deal, Representative, and I think buying out of development rights, something should be part of the strategies that are part of a longer term, vision here about what needs to be looked at. And that may bring us back again to the panelists on the market piece that talked about, I asked the question, what's the one thing we should do? And they said, well, you've got an opportunity just in Reggie right now, that you're not utilizing. So maybe we should be working on a white paper to send to our executive branch leaders, to talk about Reggie as one of the ways to deal with the natural and working lands. And the second piece that you talked about regional food, a collaborative or an opportunity, alliance of the region, and trying to keep that food source local, farm to table, or within the region. I think that's something we should put on the agenda. Next, Didi Barrett has her hand up.
Thank you. Well, thank you all, first of all, to the organizers, to Ned and Rona and Mark and everybody. This was really extraordinary couple of days. Unfortunately, I had to step off for the offset discussion today, which I really look forward to hearing more about, because that is an issue that, I think about, and, I know everyone wants to talk about it, so I want to hear what was discussed. But I totally agree with you, Mark, that the executive seems to have one thing going and the legislators another, and we aren't always on the same page. In some ways, our advocates are the ones who kind of help us, keep us informed. But I really do like the idea of a regional approach. I mean, soil and forestry, they don't know anything about state borders. A regional food system makes sense. I think we really actually could free up resources if we were working more collaboratively on some of this kind of information and some of this approach.
Exactly.
Because it
Yes.
would, it's, I mean, it changes obviously in different parts, but it changes within our states. And so I would love to see more work done on a regional basis, especially sharing research, sharing data, looking at what the issues are and how we can best approach them when it comes to sequestration or dealing with those property rights issues or anything else. And then the other issue that that is I brought up actually with Commissioner Ball, which I kind of always do every time we talk, but is this balance between the climate targets and supporting our communities. And I see this in a much more holistic way after this morning's earlier conference. I mean, our BIPOC communities, our farmers of color, and our indigenous communities, but also our rural communities that are being torn because of the big money that comes with some of these huge solar farms or these huge renewable projects that could change the whole economy and the view sheds and the just the livability of communities that are very supportive of solar and very kind of intentional about the goals in the zoning rules that they're making, but they're kind of being steamrolled. And then you have communities like those in the Adirondacks that are being sort of they want to make a living, they want to keep it livable, they want to be able to exist, but then the other forces at play there. So I feel like we really need, and maybe this is something the legislators can do better than the executive, but in some states, that we need to have a more nuanced approach. As people like to say, the sort of scalpel rather than the sledgehammer approach. But I really do think that we can't just be depending on sound bites in how we legislate this policy. We really have to be understanding the short, the long term, and what we're leaving to future generations as well. So those are some of my thoughts.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, Didi. And I think one level of government we haven't talked about is the federal piece, So USDA working with us regionally in the different regions of the country. It's going to be very, very important depending upon how the Biden administration is going to work out some of that investment that is coming back out to be invested across the country, that 40% that is going to go into hard hit areas that should be invested into. So anyway, next, Sacha.
Thanks, Senator. And again, thanks for the chance to join. I've actually learned a lot in this conference, and I really appreciate the chance to be a part of it. Loved the last session with the commissioner and Dr. Bell. I just thought there were so many pieces of gems of wisdom dropped there in that discussion. I guess my takeaway or my message in general is that this is an all lands on deck moment. We need to bring all lands to bear on this challenge, and that's both a little bit daunting and possibly overwhelming, but at the same time is an opportunity to recognize that every landowner and every land related policy has a chance to be a part of this solution. And as sort of policymakers, that means looking at all of the pathways that impact land use. So it's about transportation and housing, which drive development patterns. And the Representative Partridge mentioned, the loss of forest to development is one of the biggest risks to carbon in the Northeast right now. It's not necessarily the biggest opportunity for increased sequestration, but it's the biggest risk to carbon loss. And so getting transportation and housing and development patterns right is a huge part of this, right? And that's not necessarily about incentive payments, but it could be the buyout of development rights, or it could be a re-examination of property rights, as it relates to the public good. So I think there's some big questions hanging over us. But something else that a number of folks have mentioned this morning, I think is really fundamentally important, which is this kind of alignment between federal, state, and local policies to get big flows of resources like the Farm Bill and the infrastructure bill flowing through channels to the authorities that really have where the rubber hits the road, or I shouldn't use that metaphor in this context, but where the actual leverage on what happens on the land occurs. And so since most land use authority and land use policies are actually happening at lower jurisdictions, ensuring that those federal dollars are flowing through in the right way is, I think, super important. And related to that is adopting existing or adapting and expanding existing programs to this purpose is, if they can be made fit to purpose, is probably really important in this moment, given how quickly we need to get to implementation here. Standing up new programs may not get us to the goal line, whereas, you know, the soil and water districts, you know, have been mentioned a few times. You know, these programs that were rapidly rolled out during Dust Bowl times, during the Depression, could be rapidly adjusted for this purpose at this moment. This is the scale of the challenge that we're dealing with. It's a mobilization moment. It's not a time for policy tinkering. And so, you know, using the mechanisms that we have available, but making them pivot rapidly is, I think really called for. Senator, you are, sorry, Commissioner Ball mentioned, you know, partnership with civil society and with philanthropy. And I think, you know, speaking from a foundation's perspective, we're here and we're all in on this agenda and want to know what you need, want to know where the barriers are, and how we can help your civil society NGO partners be innovators, but also bring folks together in venues like this to figure out what's next.
Sacha, you know that's very dangerous.
Oh, I know. I don't issue that invitation.
And that anything you need, and you're talking to a bunch of legislators, you know.
Right. Well, you guys have actually more money than we do, but we might be able to move flexibly to address challenges. I guess the last thing I'd say is, and this comes around to where I started, which is that the land sector is a different sort of challenge and opportunity than a lot of the rest of the climate agenda. This is not big energy infrastructure that's dealt with through PUC process. This is much more in some ways like energy efficiency, where you have millions of homes that need upgrading, where you have to address what people's interests, concerns, home economics, and long-term, you know, plans are. And that means that both in terms of policies, incentives, regulation, and funding flows, we can't lose track of the human behavior element of this. What we're trying to do is actually help people make changes in the way they use their land. And that means the behavioral scientists, behavioral economics is a really critical and I think overlooked part of this whole equation. We can't have a giant gap between the physical potential of our land to address climate and what people are doing on the land. If that gap is enormous because programs are not being taken advantage of, the uptake is low, we will not meet our goals. And so really making sure that these things are tailored to what people want, need, and want to get involved in is really fundamental. And I think everyone's spoken to that kind of urgency as well. So I'll stop talking. I've gone too long, but I just really appreciate the chance to be part of this.
Well, let me just say that, you know, that you really put a lot of things into perspective there, because when we look at what is happening relative to zoning, the whole issue of zoning and how we deal with it in our respective states will have a lot to do. I mean, we're really getting into the weeds now about what needs to happen, but with a big picture look at our region or other sub-regions of the US, that's exactly what governments need to, you know, start looking at, you know, how we're going to creating livable regions of, for example, for myself, it's in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Now we're putting forth a bill in this session that I'm sponsoring to rehabilitate 1 million homes over the next 10 years, 100,000 a year, in existing built environment, so that we're not expanding, but we're making sure we bring down carbon and we cut energy costs. So we have major savings in energy efficiency. And if you combine that with targeting the natural and working lands, now you're talking about something that is huge in terms of both of those areas working together. I'm going to ask Jack behind the scenes here that Dana Stein has a question that we might want to give him access to the panel here. He indicates, we got Dana on. So Dana, why don't you ask your question?
Sure. Thank you, Senator. And it's similar to the point that you raised about Reggie. I was really intrigued when Aaron Paul said that there's an offset mechanism provision in Reggie that hasn't been used or is used
Right.
very little, and that if that was leveraged more, that it would provide more opportunities for forest carbon projects to be enrolled. And similar to what you had suggested, Senator, this could be a space where CSG gets involved, since the footprint between Reggie and CSG East is very similar.
Yeah, I mean, almost all of those states would be in our CSG East region. And also there's another mechanism that's being developed. All the states are not there, but it's TCI. So the Transportation Climate Initiative is another mechanism that could potentially be used in some, other states in terms of the resources. But I think that is an area we should, pay attention to, especially where it's there. And it was actually contemplated early on, but the value of the rate structure has not changed. And so we may want to work with our executive branch partners in looking at a revaluation of where we are, given what we want to do in terms of investment in natural and working lands, and how big a deal that piece is in terms of our climate protection plans, whether it's in New York State or Massachusetts or other states that either have goals or requirements in law to meet these pieces. So I think your comments are right on, Dana, and that's one of the things we should put down as far as our notes to try to get to it. We have another question from Jeffrey Pontent. I am currently part of a multi-university New York food vision research project, collaborating with reps from the New England Food Vision. He wanted to give us that perspective that there are some higher education organizations that are working with collaboration agreements. We may want to define some of these other areas. For example, Sacha, in the philanthropy area in the Northeast, maybe it would be helpful to philanthropy to take a look at what we may be working on and thinking about. And maybe there's a more efficient way for those philanthropic dollars to head to various areas that you'll get a better bang for the buck, and so won't society. And then the final question is, we need to reimagine what it means to own property. A house is a home, land is our lifeline. These are not just financial investments. Perhaps land ownership becomes stewardship. How could ownership be redefined? So let me open that up to all of our panelists to to just react to those last couple of questions. Anybody have any reaction to that or any?
Well, I'll say that there is a Northeast Climate and Energy Funders group, which is a group of philanthropies that are really focused on climate and are based in or focused on the Northeast. I'll say it's often, actually, even in the philanthropy side, it's hard to get folks to recognize the land use part of the climate equation. So if you're interacting with folks at those philanthropies, you could make my job easier by, demanding they get involved in land use. I'll direct them in the right way once they're energized, but get them going.
We could invite them to a meeting with our new state legislative climate alliance. Looking at what the Biden administration goals happen to be in terms of the feds, what they're talking about doing, and where we want to be as not only a region, but making these investments. So,
can I just add something? I would just, say from the standpoint of a legislator representing a largely rural area, I think that part of our challenge, and I think this is probably where the philanthropy community is, kind of taking its cues too, is that where the people are in the urban areas. So when we're talking about land use and when we're talking about these rural issues, we're largely in a minority in terms of what people think about every day, what their focus is. So I think whatever we do, we've got to figure out how to build those bridges and make those connections. And I also use this caveat because when I was first elected, I was the first one from this area in the Hudson Valley to be in the majority conference. And I made the point of saying to my colleagues, my constituents are feeding your constituents. And, it was kind of this connection with farmers markets and farmers and all of that. And it resonated. And now all my colleagues have bills on urban farming. And it's like, we don't need you anymore. We're just going to do it right here in New York City. So, I mean, I think we have to kind of look at all of those issues and how we create the positive synergy working together for shared goals and, not leaving anybody behind.
Yeah, there was one question that came in, and I'm going to go back to Representative Partridge in just a second, but Josie Gordon writes, you don't think Americans will push back when you tell them the forest land they own is now just a stewardship. And that's true, there will be pushback on that, but there can be some connection with investment in terms of carbon credits. If you're getting a credit for utilizing forest land, then you need to have some third-party verification that the carbon credits are actually going to be available 10 years from now, 20 years from now, to be making that investment. So you couldn't do that across the board, but in those areas where you are investing in or buying development rights out so that they, they can't, cut down the forest. So Representative Partridge.
Thanks, Mark. You actually triggered some thoughts for me in that our current use program actually gives people a tax break essentially on their forest land. So that is an incentive there. But to make it even more valuable, it would be interesting to be able to involve folks in carbon markets. And we actually created a task force, and the Commissioner of Forest Parks and Recreation was a part of that. It was originally going to be a pilot program that he kind of said, I think that's biting off more than we can chew. But the concept of aggregating land, enrolling state land in a carbon market, maybe it's voluntary, probably voluntary, because I think as Aaron Paul was talking about some of the projects they're involved, 3 of them are in Vermont. And I know the Burnt Mountain one went for the compliance market, but ended up pursuing a voluntary market. But in terms of so that's one little bit there. But in terms of capital, access to capital, I think that we could have additional conversations because philanthropy is sort of part of that as well. There are groups, Flexible Capital Fund, the Dirt Capital Partners, Cooperative Fund of New England, VEDA, which is the Vermont Economic Development Authority, Vermont, which is associated with Vermont Agricultural Credit Corporation. All of these groups offer slow money, patient money, patient repayment sorts of plans to help folks get involved. And I know all of them are really interested in getting involved with the BIPOC community. And the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, I actually shot Gus Seelig, the executive director, an email. It is Saturday, and I suppose he's taking the day off. Oh, hold on a sec. He's telling me, he just responded, regarding conserved land, he says, Carolyn, I think we are somewhere around 21 to 23% for all land in the state, which includes state parks and forests, as well as fish and wildlife management areas, as well as the Green Mountain National Forest. I believe the percentage of farmland conserved is smaller. And then he wants to talk to me about ARPA money. So that's a different subject. But at any rate, we're making, we've made strides. And I think the whole farm to plate movement, which happened started 12 years ago, and then the subsequent Working Lands Enterprise Initiative, which we are this year, it's because of COVID money, we're actually investing if the governor signs it, $5 million in those Working Land Enterprise Initiative businesses. So this is the exciting thing for me. I love talking about this stuff, and it excites me and wants me to keep going. So even after 23 years of being in the legislature.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Carolyn. Listen, everybody, now the questions are starting to pour in here. And
of course.
People that were, it's always right at the end, right? It's always when you just have a few minutes left. But the good news is that we can go over just a few minutes. Why not, if we choose to? But I would say we don't want to really go on too much longer. But there are two quick questions in the chat here, which is not in the question and answer section, unfortunately. But Assemblyman Kamenak, Kabinchak, has a question. You want to open him up to allow? Yes, there you are. Assemblyman, you have to unmute yourself. Assemblyman, can you unmute?
Hello,
There he is.
here I am. Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. Assemblyman Rob Kabinchak from New Jersey. Just wanted to take a quick moment and first of all, thank all of the people who spoke in the last 2 days. It was extremely informative, and I think our message has to get out to a lot more people than the group that's been listening now. One of the good things I just wanted to say is that Governor Murphy and his administration just released the first state's climate change resilience strategy on Earth Day. So we are moving forward with this process in New Jersey. The one question I do have for everyone is, we talk about a lot of different things, but we need people. And so the question is, what does the workforce development look like for forest restoration, soil carbon capture projects, and how we could encourage our young adults to pursue these career paths, especially those in the urban communities who are disproportionately affected by climate change and pollution. That is, in my opinion, where we have to start and engage people. So anything that could be answered, that'd be great. Any way I could help, I'm there. And I look forward to being part of this major, major change in our world.
Great. Stay involved with the ESG, State Legislative Climate Alliance, what's happening with the Carbon Alliance as well in the Northeast. I can just tell you from the Biden administration, what is happening now is you see part of the initiative in the American Jobs package that is being proposed is to actually have a civilian climate corps doing exactly what you just referenced, to try to deal with going after this climate issue in ways that can involve and embrace and really have the youth of America really be involved in this initiative as well. And there are ways in which we could do that. And one of our colleagues, Dana Stein, could give us some examples with his involvement with sustainability and civic work with students. It's exciting. So I couldn't agree with you more. There are initiatives that can be highlighted out there, and we should probably collect some of those best practices to share state initiatives or what's happening nationally. I can tell you that in our state, I filed a piece of legislation to do exactly that, to look at working with our higher education institutions and giving students credit in terms of service-based, learning opportunities that go along with their various majors, in healthcare and science and agriculture, etc. So these are things that we can be working on together. We had another hand up. I thought you had your hand.
Mark,
Yes.
I would just jump in and say, workforce is huge.
Huge.
And workforce development is huge. And I think if we have another one of these webinars, we should have a whole section devoted to workforce development. Maybe it's something we do at our annual meeting. Who knows?
Yes, and there's
like
one
that.
final question from a Jeff Scales, a question regarding climate smart communities.
I can respond to that,
Yeah,
Senator. First, Jeff Scales is a great guy. He lives not far from me and runs a sustainable investment firm, JSA Associates. A little shout out for his green investing strategies. But he raised a couple of issues. First, he noted that Dutchess County has a Center for Sustainability and Climate Education for K through 12 and just had their first full day summit 2 weeks ago for teachers, administrators, and students. So, that's, I think, a very responsive idea relative to what we've just been discussing about engaging the young people of our regions. We also have a program in New York State called Climate Smart Communities, run by the Department of Environmental Conservation, that provides grants, and they have municipalities take pledges to do a number of things, creating emissions inventories, setting goals for climate action, decreasing energy uses. You can get funds for electric vehicle charging stations and that kind of thing. And one of the categories is implementing climate smart land use. So that is something that definitely could be applied to the agriculture and forest sectors. It's sort of, I think, triggered at the local level. So it's the kind of thing that has been discussed where everybody needs to be involved. Everybody needs to talk to your local leaders, because as everybody says, like politics, it's all local. And so you can get involved in your community to make sure this is a priority, particularly if you have agriculture and forest resources in your community. So thanks, Jeff, for those two good questions and comments.
Thank you, Ned. Thank you. Now, listen, I unfortunately, we're going to have to bring this to a close. And this has been a fantastic 2 days. I want to just take this opportunity, first of all, to thank the CSG staff. They have been just phenomenal. Yes, let's give a round of applause to Rona and all the staff that have been working so hard to put this together. It has just been amazing. And the amazing thing about these 2 days is that we have recorded this as well. And so countless numbers of legislators from throughout not only the East, but the Midwest and the West, and anywhere in the US will be able to watch this programming and take advantage of the knowledge that has been imparted to all of us yesterday and today. So I want to thank you, Rona, and the entire staff for this fantastic job. I want to thank Ned and Scenic Hudson for their partnership. I want to thank, yes, big applause for all of their work. I want to thank all the panelists that have been involved here, bringing your expertise to us, helping legislators come to terms with the gaps sometimes that, and I'll speak for myself, that we have in terms of the knowledge areas that we can then apply back to legislation. Once we know of the areas in which we can be assisted on. For example, what was talked to us today about the Reggie in ways in which we might be able to work on that together. That is a tremendous opportunity and knowledge sharing that we all had as a result of this meeting. And I also want to ask legislators that are still with us today to continue to be involved with the Northeast Carbon Alliance and with the newly created State Legislative Climate Alliance. That's going to be open to any legislator in the US and the territories, throughout the entire country that want to join. We had a significant number of people that have been involved. I've been getting calls, texts throughout the 2-day conference here from colleagues that were on for a little while and had other events that they had to go to, congratulating CSG on the work that they're doing here. They came in for 1 or 2 of the sessions that they were interested in, and then they said they're going to watch the whole thing later on. It's great. This is fantastic to provide this opportunity for legislators. So I want to thank everybody, and I want to turn it over to Ed. To Ted. I'm going to rename him now. But want to have Ned please just give us your comments from Scenic Hudson's point of view and anything else that you may want to add at the conclusion of today's 2-day conference. Ned.
Well, thank you, Senator. Thank you for your great leadership and partnership in this. I echo your thanks to Rona and the entire CSG team, to Andy Bicking, who collaborated so closely with Rona in putting the program together, and Heather Eckert, our project manager for Northeast Carbon Alliance. The panelists, these final panelists were great. Didi, Sacha, Representative Partridge, thank you so much for your great insights. And, I just think we have a fantastic opportunity. As I started in my opening remarks, we're at a moment where this issue is the most urgent and important thing that any of us can focus on, because the entire planet and our way of lives are at stake here. So I'd like to think of this as the beginning of a great collaboration, and we've identified so many issues where we can overlap and cooperate and really leverage all our efforts. So I'm very excited about that, energized, and just in case anybody's been looking over the course of this time for a website for the Northeast Carbon Alliance, it's under construction. But if you want to follow up, you can be in touch with me at Scenic Hudson or Andy Bicking at Scenic Hudson. We have a great group, again, inspired initially by Abby Rockefeller, who continues to be our inspiration, and a great group of land managers, scientists, and public policy leaders who are prepared to continue this collaboration with you at CSG and with all your colleagues.
Thank you very much, Ned Sullivan, for your leadership and your expertise that you have brought to this conference as well. To everyone that has tuned in and is still with us, we're concluding this two-day conference from CSG East and Scenic Hudson. If you want to continue to be involved and you want to join the State Legislative Climate Alliance, please give Rona Cohen an email. You know how to reach her. That's how you found out about the conference. So let her know, get her your information, and we'll continue to be in touch. This is the decisive decade. We are in a climate crisis. We have to act urgently. So that means we need to get back together soon, and we will. Thank you very much. Thank all of you for being involved, and this concludes the conference.